All right. Welcome to the DDD webinar. My name is Sharad Nalavade. I'll be presenting for the next couple of hours about the domain-driven design. Am I audible to everyone? Is there any issue with the voice, with audio? In which case, you can always send me a chat or just speak up. Is it okay? Am I audible enough?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're audible.
All right. Excellent. So welcome to the webinar. I believe there are 15 participants, including, of course, myself and Preeti. I believe she's the coordinator here. In case of any logistic issues, Preeti can help us out. You could also stop me during my presentation anytime if you have a question to ask or if you want to make any comments. All right, so moving on, I would like to just make sure that we have the right, audience that is prepared for this kind of an agenda. I don't expect any specific background in DDD as such, because this webinar is going to introduce some aspects of DDD concepts and a couple of techniques that might be of use to some of the architects and the designers. So the whole idea is to run through this these topics such as aligning the business domain with the software engineering practices. I'm going to touch upon the challenges of the digital transformation that's happening all over, and as a result of that, the impact that is creating on the quality of the software that we're developing today. The role of software design and architecture itself is pretty critical in terms of delivering the value to the customer, and we'll touch upon briefly on that through what is called dynamic software. So I will walk through some of the examples of what exactly is an dynamic software and how can we deal with a situation where we end up with a very complex software that is leading to a lot of challenges and maintainability issues. And then, of course, formally I will introduce what is domain-driven design, and we'll touch upon a few concepts and techniques, and what is in it for the business stakeholders in terms of DDD, because they are the ones who actually initiate this DDD project initiative within the enterprise. And we will see the role of a business stakeholder vis-a-vis the designers and the developers of the software. We have a few DDD patterns, both tactical as well as strategic. We'll touch upon some of those patterns and see how far we can try and understand how to apply them for our software projects. One of the things that's happening all over the world today is the microservices development, and the microservices and the APIs are the two pillars of any organization today that wants to quickly move on to the cloud-based services that can be consumed by the global customers. And obviously we need to understand exactly how can DDD help in terms of developing the microservices and the APIs. And overall, some of the tips that is based on my experience with some of the projects that I do with my customers that I would like to share towards the end. And of course, you can always follow that up with the question and answer formally, but I don't want you to wait till the end. You can always raise your hand or just pitch in with your question. Not a problem. All right, so I believe you are able to see my screen without any problem. So when we are historically we have been in the software business for a very very long time now. At least when I say we, I'm basically talking from the Indian perspective. At least I have been in the industry for the past 3 decades, and I've seen all the way from the earliest programming languages such as Basic, Fortran, and COBOL, the software industry evolving into the client server architecture, and then into the 3-tier architecture, and then of course the onslaught of Java, and subsequent to that web-based applications, and after that the cloud, the SaaS, the PaaS, and so on. And then of course after that the social networking wave of, soon after that we have the digital transformation happening all over. Now, over a period of time, the style of programming has been changing constantly. Obviously, as we progress into the recent times, we will see that the pace at which the software is getting churned out has increased. Leading to quite a few challenges. Everybody wants to deliver their services as quick as possible. And obviously, you have to pay cost for that. And the cost for that is the quality of the software. And that is termed by Brian Foote and Joseph Yoder in one of the conferences in 1997 as a big ball of mud. What it really means is a very complex, confusing software, designed and developed purely by the understanding of the developer, with not much of a consultation with the business stakeholders or the other domain experts. The kind of a software that has been accumulating within the industry itself is really, on one extreme we have a legacy software built in Java, J2E environment, .NET, and of course even prior to that a lot of legacy code existing by virtue of the client server projects such as Visual Basic, Visual C++, and good old COBOL code and whatnot. And most of the industry is still using at least 20-30% of their backend processes are all happening through these legacy systems, the mainframe systems, and most of the, for example, in a bank treasury management system itself is being run by the good old massive backend mainframe systems, because that they are highly reliable in nature. Nobody will touch that software. The software has been running quite well. We don't expect anything to change in the backend functionality of the software that we built. But what has happened over the last couple of decades is obviously the desire to expose your services over the internet or the web through a couple of means of bringing in extra layers, and the software itself has to change over a period of time. So a couple of options there. One, of course, is to really see how software can be re-engineered, refactored, remodified, or redesigned as it exists today. But that's more or less the dressing of the old software, and possibly in terms of its core functionalities, it might still perform, but in terms of its ability to scale to the recent needs of the consumers, obviously the software may not stand a chance. So the software that we are developing today is really a kind of spaghetti code mixed up with lot of ideas coming in from the last 3 or 4 decades of software engineering practices. And although object-oriented analysis and design has been our primary approach for designing the software, not all the techniques or not all the concepts, not all the patterns within OOAD have been exploited. It looks like, yes, we're using a lot of techniques within OOAD, but it's all really done at a very superficial level, and most of the software still remains highly monolithic, in its nature. And when I say monolithic, obviously this has got everything crammed into one single piece of software. And when you start using that software and start replicating that across multiple environments, obviously you will also be copying a lot of your mistakes and a lot of your shortcomings of the software itself. So that's what we call software mud, basically the big ball of mud. And of course, we have the software complexity arising out of upfront design. Upfront design is really a kind of, you come up with a design idea so quickly that there is hardly any time for us to absorb the core requirements that the domain experts or domain stakeholders would like you to implement. And sometimes, of course, we also do over analysis of the requirements to an extent that it will confuse to a lot of issues, and obviously this is because of the fact that most of the stakeholders do not know themselves what is expected of them, right? And of course, there is a communication gap between the domain experts and the software developers. There is no common language that exists today. In fact, I've seen with my own customers that most of the offshore team never ever get to speak to their customers, right? The customer would speak about the requirement to the local software team, project team, or project manager, who will translate that to their team, and then that team translates the requirements to the offshore team. And within the offshore team itself, there are multiple layers. As a result of that, most of the communication gets completely diluted or misinterpreted, and leading to a lot of challenges. And when it lands up with the developers, it's more or less the one-way communication, because the developers cannot get back with any kind of clarifications from the business stakeholders who are far away and disconnected. Ideally speaking, we have the business stakeholders speaking to the analysts and speaking to the developers, keeping it very simple, straightforward, two-way communication. But generally speaking, because of the nature of the project, models, we do not have such a luxury. So normally there are too many layers of bureaucracy that get crept into the project team or project structure, leading up to a lot of confusion there. So this is completely avoidable, and obviously, somebody has to look into those aspects from the project management perspective, and make sure that the domain experts are in constant touch with the developers, so that there is enough clarity on exactly what is required. Now, Agile has been in vogue for the past couple of decades now. I was, in fact, one of the first one to get Agile certified in India, and I've been consulting on Agile practices with my customers. Agile, has been helping a lot of customers, but it has also led to a lot of issues. Again, I do not want to be a kind of a person on the other side of the table here, with regards to the Agile. So basically, Agile is really not necessarily in its core a software engineering, technique, but or other software engineering, methodology, but it can possibly be applied elsewhere too, right? But Agile has been overhyped, and obviously we cannot assume that Agile, just having an Agile practice means that all my problems are solved. Of course, Agile brings in a lot of good practices such as ownership, transparencies, upfront communication, and so on and so forth. But in reality, we as long as you adopt agile practices in all its spirit, we possibly cannot reap the benefits of that. So again, this debate rages on. I'm not too sure whether some of you who are practicing, agile would agree with me, but it doesn't matter, because most of us have a different, experiences, and possibly in some cases, agile would have helped you a lot. So when I say anemic software, anemic system, so essentially all the way from 1980s until today, we have been writing software using multiple tools, multiple languages, and of course, as you've seen in 1990s and the early periods of the close of the century. We hit upon visual tools, leading up to the Visual Basic approach for developing the software, which basically separated the client from the server. Although both of them were sitting in the same room, separated possibly by the LAN. Uh, the prolific use of the visual tools and the IDEs really led to what is called the rapid application development. What we normally used to do was to develop the prototype of the required, of the required software, demo it to the customer, and then extend the same prototype to a full-fledged application, right? One of the things that happened with this kind of an approach was that most of the capabilities of the visual tool used by the developers were around get and set kind of a thing, right? So basically we focused more on the GUI part of it, the screen, look and feel, the interface to the users, possibly the customer experience. And we also focused a lot on creating a lot of properties for all the fields that we created there. So we also gave a lot of importance to the navigation details of the software itself. So from the usability perspective, we had a fantastic approach, right from 1990 onwards until even today, because most of us do focus on ease of use, usability, a lot of cosmetics, plus of course the user experience. At the back end, we have massive changes happening. Two tier led to the three tier led to the multi tier, and of course, in today's distributed environment, we have the servers spread all over. The clients are, of course, omni-channel clients nowadays, because we have the mobile, we have the laptop, we got to connect with your server on the move, and so on and so forth. So now, given that trend, the most of the developers have stuck with their own original way of coding. They did not possibly, exploit the uh, the core principles of object-oriented programming, largely because of the lack of time, or possibly lack of training that's required. And secondly, the tools have started dictating the way that we should be coding our software, right? So most of the tools, so of course the trend nowadays is to talk the tool language, not the language per se. We don't talk about how do I optimize my code. I don't talk about how do I structure my code. I don't talk about how do I measure the quality of my code. But mostly I don't even talk about the documentation of the code, but I mostly talk about what tool to use. How do I use my tool to kind of, come up with some kind of, software engineering tips that I can implement right away, right? So nowadays, we download the tool, open source tools, and try it out and start implementing those solutions as quickly as possible. So as a result of that, that has led to a lot of challenges. So generally speaking, as the developer or the software designer, we should be looking at an approach of modeling. So which means that we listen to the stakeholders, the domain experts, in terms of what they want. Obviously, the domain experts have no time to explain what they want. Possibly, whatever the documentation that they created would be shared with you. It is for you to understand, digest, and figure out exactly what the customer wants, or what the domain experts need. In many situations, it so happens that we go back to the domain experts with a model, possibly saying that yes, we understood most of what you want, and here is the model that we would like to present you. So a model is really a kind of a visual representation of the underlying software functionalities that the customer is looking at, and those models can vary, from being a very high-level block diagrams to a very detailed out component level diagramming, specifically UML based languages, or maybe Archimate kind of notation based language that can be used to model a particular requirement and then demo it back to the stakeholders. Now, obviously, the language that the domain experts speak is not the same as the developer speaks. So again, in the last 15, 20 years, we have seen that most of the developers are using the language that they feel comfortable with while coding. So whether it's the name of a method or name of the class or the name of the service that you're calling or name of the handler that you're using to deal with some kind of an event, or the name of the function itself, or the arguments or variables, whatever we deal with within our programming environment, we choose those concepts or the language that is comfortable with us, right? That is something that we are comfortable with, rather than using the domain concepts of the language that can be used by or that is something that is comfortable with the domain expert. So that's where the most of the challenges come in. Now, any domain for that matter, whether it's a banking domain or retail or logistics or any technology company on driving certain SaaS-based services, has its own knowledge base. That is what we call domain, right? So this knowledge has its own language that needs to be understood by the developers. And what we normally do is use that language input to distill out a model that can then be used to develop our rest of the software pieces. So generally, the way we do it is really, kind of a brainstorming with the stakeholders, trying to ask questions and so on and so forth. Normally, in my case, I do a lot of discovery workshops with my customers, bringing in the business stakeholders and the developers community to the same table and let them fight it out, right? So that's the best way to look at it. Eric Evans, one of the early creators of the ideas behind domain-driven design, more than about 13-14 years ago, explains that effective domain modelers are essentially the knowledge crunchers. So what you are doing as a developer or a designer is really ask the right kind of questions around the domain so that you can take back the domain knowledge, and when you start coding, you are actually using those domain concepts within your code. So it's really, kind of a very idealistic approach to coding, because in between the developers and the stakeholder, there are quite a few people interacting, and obviously that's a kind of a noise that we will hear. So the whole idea is to really, eliminate those unwanted noise and focus more on exactly what is required by the domain experts. So that leads to what is domain-driven design all about then, right? So DDD, as it is abbreviated, is really all about developing a very simple software for complex requirements. Software need not be complex, but the requirement can be complex. So what essentially we do is really to connect the implementation. So when I say implementation, it refers to the way that you are coding, the way that you are designing or architecting the software. And you are connecting that to an evolving core business concept. So obviously in today's world, you will see that most of the enterprises use most of the domain concepts, but you will always end up with the core domain that an enterprise depends upon to earn its revenue, to earn its money, right? So for example, banking domain has possibly retail banking and wholesale banking, investments, credit card business, and so on and so forth. So each one of them can be the core domains for that particular business unit of the bank. But that's the kind of a domain that we are referring to with regards to the core domain, because without that, the bank would not earn its profits or revenue, right? How do you translate that language or that particular domain concept into a software code that can then be used effectively by the end users or by the stakeholders? Is something related to the domain-driven design approach, right? Uh, Bank also does a lot of non-core activities, such as, let's say, transferring money from one account to another account using a payment gateway. It also provides security of your transactions, which is non-core domain, right? Bank is not interested in understanding how the security works. It's not their domain. Bank is not interested in understanding how the payment gateway works. It's not their domain, right? Uh, you might possibly also host a banking, let's say, an application within a data center, maybe on a cloud, or maybe in AWS environment. And bank is not interested in understanding how the entire cloud architecture works, right? Because it's not their domain. So the whole idea of separating out non-core concepts from the core domain concept is the essence of the domain-driven design, right? So in the past couple of decades, as I was mentioning earlier, it really has been a practice of clubbing into the code all the functionality and all the services into one monolithic code and just give it to the customers to start using it, right? So it's a kind of a, there was, of course, some good practices led to segregation of application services from the infrastructure services, and so on and so forth. So, but this is really a kind of, 3 or 4 layers that we have been talking about for the past few years, but not seriously implemented. What has been implemented, of course, is the 3-tier architecture that you come across. You got a GUI right in the front end, using as HTML screen or any client-rich screen, connected via the HTTP protocol to the backend server. Backend server, when I say, it might possibly have a couple of layers, like the web layer as well as the app server layer. And then the third layer or fourth layer could be the database layer, right? So there is a segregation, yes. But unfortunately, the code sitting on the server side does lot of things that it should not be doing, right? It handles security, it handles personalization, it handles the database connectivity. I mean, lot of stuff that is overloaded with the core software leads up to its complexity. So what domain-driven design is trying to tell us is not to do that. Try to kind of one, use the domain language, and secondly, try to organize your code according to the kind of services that you are delivering to the outside world. So essentially, the DTD premise is to place the project's primary focus on the core domain and the domain logic, right? So that is the essential part of it. Of course, there can be a lot of code, lot of logic, nothing to do with the core. That should not be mixed up with the core logic or core domain logic. The second premise is to initiate a creative collaboration between technical teams and the domain experts team. Of course, this is being made possible through the agile approach, through the collaborative, development model, peer-to-peer, peer programming model. I mean, there are multiple teams with the multiple skill set working together to deliver a software. But sometimes there is always a dilution of the core, domain concepts, and also that also lead to a lot of noise as well as misinterpretation of the core domain concepts itself. So again, that is something that can be addressed to the DTD. Again, DTD is not a panacea. It is not something that will solve your problem abruptly from tomorrow, right? What it actually does is bring in some kind of a sanity, bring in some kind of a discipline, bring in some kind of a very, very effective techniques that can be employed by the developers and the designers, and who actually missed out on some of these core, very commonsensical approach earlier. So domain-driven design, once again, is not a technology. It is nothing to do with the tool. But DDD basically provides a structure of practices and a set of terminologies, of course, its own language that can lead up to quite a lot of benefits. But it really essentially to focus on the core requirement of the domain experts. As to why we need DDD, domain experts know a lot more than developers. So obviously, this is true because at the end of the day, what you're developing is to be used by the domain experts. So if you're not meeting their requirements, then obviously what you're creating here is something that that is of your own idea, right? Your own thinking, which the domain experts may not be interested in. Secondly, put domain experts and developers on the same level playing field. That means that they are going to be working as one single team. Okay. There is a zero translation, of course, between domain experts and developers, which means that they are using exactly the same language. I'll touch upon a couple of examples of what language one can use between the domain experts and the developers. This language, of course, in DDD context called is referred to as the ubiquitous language, right? So we'll touch upon that. Essentially, the principle is that design is the code and the code is the design. That means that the code that you have created is a true reflection of the design, which is again a true reflection of exactly what the business wants, right? Steve Jobs said this long time ago, with regards to the iPhone. That iPhone is the design and design is iPhone, right? So similarly, we have whatever the code that you design is really the design that is ultimately aligned with what the business wants. Again, just like in Agile, it's never us or them, it's always us, which is basically one team. And here it is. So we got a ubiquitous language that is developed and spoken between domain experts and the developers. And these two, this particular language is evolved, right? It is not something that you will speak on the day one. What generally happens is that the developers and the domain experts meet together and discuss a lot about the requirements. And obviously, developers would ask a lot of questions. There's a lot of brainstorming. And as a result of that, everybody starts speaking the same language. You need to use the DDT to simplify and not to complicate. Okay. So, and then invest in DDT to address most complex parts of the business to get better, values, better return, and the value to the customer. One of the things that normally discussed within your projects is whether a particular project is a candidate for the DDD or no. So how do we do that? So it's basically explained by a guy called Vaughan Vernon, who has written a book called Implementing Domain-Driven Design. He has come up with this kind of a DDD scorecard. And the DDD scorecard is really telling you to qualify any given project. Look at the kind of operations that you carry out. Let's say if you're doing only the CRUD, right? Create, read, update, and delete kind of operations. Very simple, straightforward, screen to database kind of manipulations. There's nothing, big about the functionality that you need to develop, or possibly there is no, domain logic existing at all. So what you're doing is you're logging in into your system through your front end and directly accessing the database and doing some manipulations. Possibly there's a very, very minimal amount of validation that you are doing there, in which case it's not a candidate for DDT at all, right? So it's not a very realistic, conceptually relevant project for you to really think seriously in terms of converting that to a DDT approach. Likewise, if you have the number of operations hovering around 25 to 30, Operations, I mean the simple operations like, let's say, fund transfer can be an operation, right? Uh, you know, let's say uh, taking a backup, right? Or maybe carrying out a fulfillment or carrying out a payment. If you feel that some of these operations are very few, possibly you're not a core domain stakeholder, possibly you're developing something which is a subdomain and trying to really meet a requirement of a very small business team, in which case that particular project may not qualify to be a DDD again. It can possibly be very simple one to implement. You don't have to really unnecessarily create a overhead of that. So if you could quickly and easily develop such an application using, let's say, Ruby on the Rails or Groovy and Grails and some of these tools, that's, this is exactly what's happening in the industry today. You download a tool like, I don't know, maybe some of the tools that you have today, and simply use them to develop a software quickly without giving a second thought to the DDD approach, because there are no domain experts asking for any specific requirements there. Be done with that. But if the operations that you are carrying out are many, let's say very complex telecom is involved with multiple applications, multiple systems spread across multiple locations. So you have to do lots of data crunching. You have to offer a lot of services. You need to really focus on a lot of challenges in terms of integration across multiple platforms and so on and so forth. And obviously, the entire software that you're going to develop would become pretty complex. In which case, the DDD can be one of the techniques that you might want to look at. Likewise, if there's an application that's not going to be complex today, but it might over a period of time become too complex to handle, right? Maybe you're developing your own ERP system, or you're developing your own performance management system, or you're developing your own data warehouse application. Today it might sound very simple, but over a period of time it really becomes too complex. Then DDD can be considered upfront. So the idea is that based on your gut feel, you start putting together the score there, and based on the type of the project that you have come across. For example, earlier I said only the CRUD, not a candidate for DDD. Very simple operations, maybe score of 1, or a little more than 30, but leading up to a little more number of maybe 50, 60 or something, maybe a point of 2. Or if you assume that a project is going to be long term with a lot of functionality getting added, you are possibly, for example, delivering a new e-commerce system on the cloud, and today it might look very simple, but over a period of time you are connecting that with a lot of logistics requirements, connecting with your partner systems, integrating with the bank systems, and so on and so forth. That is going to be a pretty complex nature. So put the score of 3. The application feature is going to change very often over a period of time, and you already anticipate that. Put a score of 4. And then currently you don't understand exactly what domain you're going to be plunging into, right? So as far as nobody has done it before, so you don't have any prior experience of having done this. So obviously it's going to be complex for you. So it's kind of an unknown devil to deal with for us. So you might possibly want to keep a score of 5 or 6 or whatever you believe, based on your gut feel. But if you all total up, and if you really see the total score to be coming higher than 7 or so, then that's a good candidate for your DDD project, adopting the DDD. Just because DDD is a fancy word, you don't have to fall for it. You have to be kind of really you need to make sure that you really seriously understand the implication of using DDD approach, right? All right, so I'll just pause for a minute here just to make sure that people are with me, and before I move on to the next slide, I'll just see whether there are any quick questions that I can answer.
Hi Sharad, this is Pankaj.
Hi Pankaj, tell me what's up.
I have two questions.
Mhm.
Number one, you talked about the domain-driven development. So basically, what I'm understanding that it is something related to the functionality-oriented development. Like all the functionalities will be previously decided, and based on those functionalities, the development will be carried out. Is it correct?
Partly yes, partly no. Partly yes, because the functionality is anyway has to be implemented whether it's a DDD or non-DDD,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That anyway is required. But how do we understand what functionality to be implemented?
Mm-hmm.
That knowledge comes from the domain experts, and
Okay.
most of the developers do not, make a lot of assumptions that they understand the functionality and start implementing that. It's only at a much later stage that they realize that there is a change in what they understood, what they interpreted that requirement to be.
Mm-hmm.
And when they deliver the software to the end user, you have to do a lot of rework, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So the language that they use to develop the functionality itself is again their own language. They assume whatever the name of the method is or the class is and so on and so forth.
Correct.
That doesn't make any sense to the domain experts, huh? So it's I'll tell you what, it's as good as taking your code and asking the domain experts to read it as if it's written in English.
Okay.
That of course is a very tall order. Nobody would really write a code that can be understood by the non software expert. So but that's the ultimate goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're partly right, because yes, functionality is the core. That is where the DDD wants to focus upon.
Hmm.
Rest all is the noise, right? That
Correct.
rest all you don't have to worry. You might want to outsource some part of it. For example, payment gateway,
Hmm.
payment integration, implementing, let's say, encryption technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or integration with the backend systems, or creating, let's say, middleware. I mean, these are some of the things that a bank or a telecom or retail doesn't want to spend money on. It's not their core domain, so they might want to outsource that.
Correct, correct, correct. And Sharad, my second question is like you talked about the domain experts and the developers. So I got little confused into this. So domain experts are really the developers, or they are just the people who will be providing the input to the developers?
Domain experts are not the developers; they are the
Hmm.
people who provide the input to the developers. They are the business stakeholders,
Yeah, yeah.
right? They can be also business analysts working closely with the end users. So they're all basically end users. They understand the language quite well.
Hmm.
They know what is, for example, an insurance policy mean. What is the claim means.
Hmm.
They understand what is redemption means. They understand what is, for example, commission to a particular transaction means. These
Hmm.
are the guys who are carrying out those banking operation, telecom operations on a daily basis with their customers.
Hmm.
That language needs to be understood and should be reflected within the code by the developers.
Okay, so these people will be from the development team side itself or from the client side, like you, because you discussed about that these domain experts and developers will be sitting together. So what does it mean like?
Yeah, what it means is that they are logically grouped together as one team, although they do not belong to the same team.
Hmm.
Domain experts are the people who understand the business, okay,
Hmm.
pretty well.
Hmm.
They can be deployed to a project for a particular time. They
Hmm.
can be made available to the developers any time during the project, life cycle. Developers can access the domain experts' time and knowledge anytime that they want. They can even collaborate remotely, doesn't matter. But for developers to proceed with the development work, they need to be in constant touch with the domain experts. At least in the beginning, you have the domain experts working along with the developers as if they are one team. Developers are not the testers. Domain experts are not the testers. They're not the developers. They don't recommend anything with regards to the tools, the approach, the technologies.
Hmm.
Those are the real hardcore business experts. They understand the
Okay,
business language.
okay, okay, okay. I got the point. Thank you, Sharath, for your discussion and all. I really appreciate this.
Thanks, Pankaj. Okay, so all right, so let's move on, and possibly again, if somebody has any specific question, they can always stop me in between. Let me see if we can go down. Yep. All right, so having understood the core concept behind DDD, what you're now trying to understand is what are the key concepts around DDD. If you were to implement a project, what is it that you need to understand, right? And what are DDD patterns? So let's touch upon that quickly. So one is, of course, as I said, domain, right? Domain is really a body of knowledge. Okay, it really goes by the kind of organization that you're working in. An organization may be focused purely on logistics. An organization may be purely focused on retail, right? Or a healthcare. And that is their core domain. The subdomain is the kind of a domain that only assists the core domain, that does not really carry out the core operations of the domain. I'll touch upon a few examples as we go along. I'm just trying to, briefly touch upon these concepts to start with. Ubiquitous language is the common language spoken between the domain experts and the developers. Remember that an enterprise can be very complex in nature. So obviously what you see is that every business unit has its own core language. For example, sales department has its own sales language. HR has got its own HR language. Logistics has its own. Finance has its own. So everybody has its own. So what is core in this organization? There can be multiple cores, right? In which case there can be multiple ubiquitous languages. So there will be one ubiquitous language per core domain, right? Or per subdomain. So it doesn't matter what domain it is. Domain is specified by the language and the domain concepts that it encompasses. Okay. So let's say my core domain is retail banking, and one of my operations is fund transfer from A to B. What is fund transfer means? What does, let's say, SWIFT code mean, right? What does, let's say, IMPS mean? I mean, some of the real core concepts around fund transfer has to be understood by me. I'm not talking the language of, let's say, credit card here. Credit card business is an entirely different domain, but by the same, bank, and it has its own language again, right? So business unit to business unit, the ubiquitous language might change. So your idea is to really understand the ubiquitous language for that particular domain as a developer and implement the code for them, right? That might happen for, let's say, first 3 months, and then you are moved as a developer from retail banking to the, let's say, credit card business, right? Obviously, all your concepts will change now, and you need to learn a new language of credit card business, right? So that's a new ubiquitous language that you need to be aware of. Then there's a concept of bounded context. So once you develop the language, obviously, why did you develop that ubiquitous language? The whole idea is to really apply that language, those concepts, to build your solutions, right? So bounded context comes from the solution, domain, solution perspective. What technologies, what systems, right? How do we actually translate those concepts into, let's say, the software components? Is the language that is spoken within the bounded context. And obviously, you can to keep it simple, assume that there can be one bounded context per one core domain, right? Or one subdomain. You can, of course, come up with multiple business bounded context per domain, but that will be a little more complex. And sometimes, of course, the language can be overlapping. Okay, so retail banking and wholesale banking, for example, may have about 20% of their concepts similar. So you might possibly also see a customer dealing with you as a retail customer as well as a corporate customer, in which case some of the profiling that you do for this particular customer may be a part of retail banking, or it may be part of the wholesale banking, but ultimately the kind of concept that you apply would be very similar. So there's maybe a 20% overlap of all the terms or terminology or the language terms that you use between these two domains. So even if they overlap, but if they start overlapping too much, let's say if all the business, bounded contexts start overlapping too much with one another, what does it mean? It means that you are not very clearly segregating your organization in terms of the domains and subdomains. That means your code is getting much more complex. You're going back to the spaghetti code, right? So you need to be very, very crisp, clear about defining the boundaries around a given domain and stick to that. Okay. Then we have the concept of hexagonal architecture. I'll touch upon that a bit later because we need a little bit of context for that. Just before that, there's a context mapping. I will touch upon an example to explain the context mapping. So you got multiple domains within an enterprise, multiple bounded context, but obviously there you need to have a big picture view of all these bounded contexts, right? The entire organization, and how do they kind of a map to each other. So this whole mapping of all this bounded context happens through context mapping. I'll touch upon an example later, so you will get to know exactly what it is. And then, of course, some of the objects that we use, like entity objects and value objects, aggregate, repository, domain services, event sourcing. Some of these concepts I'll just quickly touch upon when I cover that particular slide. So here are the strategic and tactical patterns, DDD patterns. So the strategic patterns are core domain, subdomain, bounded context, the ubiquitous language, and the context map. And the tactical patterns could be entity, value object, repository, event, aggregate, and so on, right? So even if you're not understood some of these, don't worry. Possibly in the next 1 hour, it will be clear. But even after that, if you don't understand, I think over a period of time, you will realize what they actually mean and how to apply. So the whole idea within a domain is to create what is called a domain, which is a sphere of knowledge. Can be banking, e-commerce, retail, insurance, telecom, whatever you call it, right? And then stick to that core domain. So what Eric Evans, one of the core founders of the DDD ideas, is really saying is that core domain should deliver 20% of the total value of the entire system. Let's say you're a Flipkart or you're an Amazon selling products online, right? What is your core business? What is your core business? Is core business shipment? Is your core business payment? Is your core business managing the product catalog? Is your core business managing the customer queries? I mean, there could be any number of operations that Amazon or Flipkart wants to carry out, but identifying the core domain can be challenging, right? In which case, what we're saying is that try to zero in on the core that will get you the revenue for your organization, right? So in case of Flipkart or Amazon, it can be, let's say, the sales process itself, right? The product catalog, product inventory to sales can be your core. Don't worry about the payment process. Don't worry about the logistic process. Don't worry about the fulfillment process. Don't worry about returns and whatever. They can be your subdomains. They can be outsourced. They can be handled by somebody else, right? So the idea is that the core should deliver 20% of the total value of the entire system. And in terms of the code base, it can be just as little as 5%. See, any business that you take today can be really condensed into a very, very small set of business rules, what we call invariants or business constraints, right? You apply that rule, that's it. For example, Flipkart, what it does, basically, if I'm selling my product on the Flipkart, I upload my product details into the Flipkart inventory. I can manage inventory from my end as a seller. I can change the profile of my, myself as a seller. I can, charge whatever fees I want. I can change the price list from my end. I can provide any options of shipment and actually fix what kind of charge that I want to apply and so on and so forth. But what Flipkart basically decides is the commission, how much they should earn out of every product that they sell online, right? And for that, what is the code base required? That the code base required to carry out that particular commission calculation is the core, right? Rest all is non-core domain, subdomain for them, right? So what we're saying is that the total value of the delivery can be 20%, but the overall code base can be 5%. And because that is something that is very, very crucial to making your business profitable, you need to focus your 80% of your effort there. Because if you make a mistake in your commission calculation, you start making loss. So this is really core, to understanding how do we spread our efforts across multiple, multiple activities within your project. As a core domain, we also have a subdomain. So basically, we got something like subdomain. It can be a supporting one, which means that it basically models some essential aspects of the business, but it's not core. For example, inventory management, invoicing. I mean, these are not the core. These can always be outsourced. I can always buy, let's say, SFDC or Microsoft Dynamics to manage all that for me, right? I don't have to develop a software for that. I don't have to hire developers for that. That's non-core for us. So it's a supporting subdomain. Or it can be generic subdomain. It can capture nothing special to the business, but it's still required to run the business, like such as data center or security, right? You still need that. So that is something that you have to focus on. So as an example, let's take a large domain split up into multiple, subdomains for a e-commerce system. So you got shipment subdomain, inventory subdomain, external forecasting system. You can order management as a subdomain, invoicing as a subdomain, and so on and so forth. So what you do is take a sheet of paper, go to your stakeholders, drop this diagram, put it on the board, and ask them to comment on that. And ask them to zero in on their, role in each one of those subdomains. So basically, what you're asking is to pinpoint where the money earning activities are focused upon, right? Focus on that as a core domain. Again, you don't have to be an expert in this. You can always, make corrections to this. In many of the projects that I have come across, I've seen that the core domain is generally not understood. It may be spread across multiple domains. In which case, you need to be, you don't have to worry too much about it. As long as you understand the entire organization or enterprise in terms of its multiple subdomains, just be happy with that. All right. So that's the kind of division that you can do. Now, once you have drawn that diagram of core domain and subdomains, now you focus on each one of those domains and try to develop a language. That's called ubiquitous language. So essentially, it's a structured language structured around the domain model, which is understood by all the team members. Normally, it is very well understood by the domain experts, but needs to be taught to the software developers. So ubiquitous language is a team pattern used to capture the concepts and the terms of specific core domain itself. Okay. So as an example, let's say you are working in a healthcare, and possible viewpoints could be, who cares, just code it up, right? Whatever let's say you are giving a shot to a patient, an injection to a patient, you might say patient.set shot type put a couple of arguments or maybe an argument there. Patient dot set dose, patient dot set nurse as some of your methods. This can be very cryptic. The end use. I think there's a background noise there. Can you mute, please? Can you mute, Preeti? Can you mute everyone, please? Okay. So you can write code to reflect the underlying domain concept, such as giving an injection to a patient. This is what we normally do today. And we assume that this particular code is not to be read by the domain experts because they are not supposed to anyway. But it is very cryptic in nature still, right? It's not so good as a code that is reflecting the underlying core concepts yet. Slightly better would be to say patient.give flu shot, right? So you are possibly using a language called give, right? So we give, which is the language spoken by the domain experts, right? The first example at the top, who cares? Just code it up, is the viewpoint by the domain expert saying that I don't have time to explain. You figure it out yourself. You are a software developer. You come up with whatever code. I don't care, right? If that's the attitude, then you will come up with the top code. But if the domain expert says we give flu shots to patients, specifically if he mentions as a kind of a small operation or a process, then you might improvise on your code by putting together patient.give flu shot, right? The best scenario would be to say, for the domain experts to say that nurses administer flu vaccines to patients in standard doses. And then the equivalent of that in the code format would be to define vaccine, the vaccine equal to vaccine dot standard adult flu dose and so on, or nurse dot administer flu vaccine. So you know the patient and you know what vaccine to administer. So if I were a domain expert and read through your code, I know precisely what it means, right? If you can achieve this kind of a clarity within your code, then that means that you have understood the ubiquitous language or the domain language quite well. So this example really tells you to get on to a kind of a practice that will help you write the code in line with what your domain experts expect. Once you understood how to implement the language, the ubiquitous language, then you need to work within your domain. But within your domain, you need to also create what are called what's called a bounded context. So bounded context essentially is capturing all those ideas within your domain, encapsulates all those operations and a particular specific service or responsibility within the model. I'll again touch upon an example so you will understand what it is. But generally speaking, as you can see here, that you may have a core domain with its own bounded context, and then you may have supporting domain with its own bounded context, or it may have a, let's say, supporting domain B may have two bounded contexts within that, and the third one is also overlapping between two bounded contexts and so on and so forth. So normally you come into this kind of a picture because it is still an evolving DDD approach. You're still not very clear 100% about that, but this is a good beginning, right? Again, you may never end up with a very crisp, clear boundaries around each of those bounded context or core domains, but even if you don't, that's fine. Okay. A bounded context, as I said, encapsulate the language, the ubiquitous language, and all the other components within that. Okay. So here you see there are three bounded contexts: Agile PM context, collaboration context, and identity and access context. but they're not independent, bounded context. They have something to give and take. They of course collaborate with each other. They exchange data, right? So obviously they need to be interacting with each other. However, if you look at the big picture, it looks like the domain is made up of 3 core domains, or possibly 3 domains, subdomains. Each one of them has its own bounded context and interacting with each other. Some of the details like database schema, interfaces, some of the protocols like LISO, REST, web services, what you're talking about, can all be embedded within each one of those bounded context, right? So the bounded context belongs to the developers, whereas the domain subdomain belongs to the domain experts. Okay, the domain experts create, or rather agree with you when you create those, like, let me go back here, this particular diagram that you created for an e-commerce system. In interaction with your domain experts have to agree here that yes, this is right. What you created is exactly what we want. Once you're done that, you come back, pick up any one of the bounded context there of interest to you, and then you add all the details in terms of the software components that you want to create for that. That is left to the developers. The domain experts will not come into picture here. The domain experts will not ask you, why are you creating 10 entities or 20 classes, or why are you instantiating this particular object? I mean, they don't care, right? So they don't even understand that language. So that's a technical language, programming language, OOAD language that you need to understand. You don't have to try to convince the domain experts. You already taken enough input from them, right? So here is an example of 2 bounded context. There's a banking context, then there's a literary context. What you've done is basically you're segregated a domain into 2 subdomains. In one of the banking bounded context, you are using lots of language terms or concepts with regards to an account maintains a record of debit and credit transactions. So it's a typical banking transaction language. Whereas in the second context, an account is nothing to do with the banking account. It basically is all about, an account is a set of literary expressions about one or more related events over a period of time. An account of, you, let's say you went on a, on a tour, and you want to write a book on that, and you're explaining exactly what happened there. It's an account of your experience, which is nothing to do with the earlier context. But in a project, if you come across an account as a concept, and that account may mean, let's say, a retail account, but in another bounded context within, let's say, a bank, if you come across an account that means a credit card account, then these 2 accounts do not mean the same. Okay, so as the context, the bounded context changes, the meaning of that particular concept also changes. Okay, so even if you come across multiple concepts or the same concept spread across multiple bounded context, you are actually referring to that particular concept in that particular bounded context. Sometime you might also have an interaction between a banking account and a credit card account. Like, let's say all your bills are being paid directly from your bank by let's say debit every month through a debit transaction for your credit card transactions. You need to link up these 2 bounded context, right? And that's called mapping. So that's called context mapping. Okay, so I'll just touch upon an example at a later stage, but generally that's the way it goes. So while a core domain or a subdomain is a part of the problem space, the bounded context is really a part of the solution space. The solution space is slightly, or rather strongly influenced by the existing systems and technologies. You may be using, let's say, I don't know, Python, right, for your projects. Now, how do we create those entities within Python? How do we create those, let's say, linked list, or how do you do the manipulation of a given data set within a Python? Is all the concept that you're using in that particular bounded context, right? So how do you implement that is highly influenced by the underlying system and technology that you are going to use. But ultimately, it's going to deliver the operations or the services that the end user wants, irrespective of the underlying content for that particular bounded context. Okay, as I said, there can be just one ubiquitous language for each of the bounded context, and the bounded context is principally a linguistic boundary. There are two bounded contexts here: banking context, literary context. So basically, it is segregating the language. Let's say you are living in an apartment complex, and you speak, let's say, a local language. Okay, let's say Kannada, right, in Bangalore, and then the neighbor speaks Tamil or Marathi or whatever. Now that's a bounded context, right? But how do we collaborate? So you need a common language like English to communicate, or Hindi to communicate with each other. That becomes a mapping exercise, right? You translate your local language into a language that this guy can understand, right? So that's the kind of the language, which is an integration language. That is not an ubiquitous language. That's only used for the mapping purposes between all the among all the bounded contexts, right? And ideally, each bounded context has its own code base. It has its own database. It can be extremely useful for developing your microservices and APIs. I'll touch upon that concept very soon. So another example of bounded context here is that you may have a sales context, you may have a support context, but in the sales context, as well as in the support context, there are two concepts, domain concepts, which are matching. For example, customer, and the other one is a product. When I say a customer in the sales context, I have a different context to that. And the same customer has a different context when I come to a support context. So in a support context, the kind of operations that I carry out or the services that I deliver are very different than the services that I deliver within the bounded context of sales context. So that's the way to treat it. Okay, so this is a simple example of that. Now, another very core concept is aggregate. Okay, now aggregate, what it is? It's basically a kind of nothing but a cluster of domain objects. A domain object can be an entity, like all your objects that you create, right, within your OED environment. A customer as a class, order as a component, or payment, account, whatever the object that you create. If you create all of them together as a cluster, that's called an aggregate. But why do you need this? Now, when you start developing using DDD approach, the idea is that you take an entire enterprise and split it up into domain and core domain. And for each one of those subdomains, you start developing the business context or the bounded context and create the software components that map to that particular bounded context, right? And all the software components that you create should relate to each other. They can't be the aggregates, sorry, they can't be the components that have nothing to do with one another. Okay. For example, if you create an aggregate called, let's say, customer, the customer address, customer ID, customer account, customer history, whatever, right? Anything to do with the customer can all be clubbed together as one aggregate. But it is a little more important than that in the domain-driven design, because an aggregate is really a kind of a transactional consistent set. What I mean by that is that whenever you carry out a transaction within your systems, lot of state change happens, which means that all these entities get updated. Now, if you have to do that transaction, you have to make sure that those transactions remain consistent across all the components that you use within an aggregate. So you are actually making an aggregate as a whole consistent for a particular given transaction. You can't have a situation where some components within an aggregate get updated and some remain unupdated or not updated, leading to some kind of inconsistency, right? Generally, you need to group together those entities who will all participate together in a single transaction, okay, from the transactional consistency perspective. An aggregate can be a cluster of objects such as order and order line items, but they all need to be connected. For example, order ID is connected to all the details of the order as a single aggregate. Now, how do we identify, or how do we access the entities or the objects within a given aggregate? To do that, what you need is one single point of reference for an aggregate. Of course, they can have multiple points of references, but those references can be what is called an aggregate root. What it means is that if you want to access, let's say, order details, let's say which customer has ordered how many books, for example, and what are the titles of the book and what are the prices of the books, and so on and so forth. Those details are all hidden within the aggregate. You are not given an access directly to all those details. Instead, what you are doing is you are accessing the root of that aggregate, and the root of the aggregate can be, let's say, order ID. Once you access the root of the aggregate, from there you can percolate down to any of the entities that you want to access. This is an important concept within DDD, and that will help you a lot in managing the consistency, transaction consistency, especially when you start developing designing your microservices. So a root can basically ensure the integrity of the aggregate as a whole. An aggregate root is the object acting as a facade for an aggregate. We are not concerned about the internals of an aggregate, how it is structured, from the external world. Okay. Here is an example. So let's say there is what is called an identity and access context. This is a bounded context belonging to one of the core domains, and it has got several entities clustered together as one aggregate, right? You have for example, tenant as an aggregate root, and this tenant entity is linked to the registration, for example, another entity, and from there you have a lot of other entities which can be accessed, right? So again, what you also see there as some kind of object, some kind of entities there existing, structured very well. For example, user is an aggregate root. Any external service wants to access, let's say, a particular details of a customer who is a user, has to go through user aggregate root, and from there they can go to other entities. Okay. Apart from cluster of objects or the entity, you can also put other entities that hold other information, like events. We talk about events a little later, but it can also have its own database or data schema, right? Maybe a couple of tables can be also part of your aggregate. What it means is, if you are carrying out a transaction involving some of these entities within an aggregate, all the components within this aggregate, all the entities within the aggregate, including the database table, including the events, including the objects, including the components, everything will have to be transactionally consistent. Otherwise, you are violating the transactional integrity. It will lead to a lot of challenges. So that's the whole idea. If you are updating only partly, then that means that your transaction is incomplete. You need to roll it back. Okay, so that's the kind of a concept. So aggregates are the basic elements of transfer of data storage. You request to load entire aggregate. You can save the entire aggregate into your database table. Okay, and the transaction within aggregate do not cross aggregate boundaries, and they should not. Then you might ask a question: if there are multiple boundaries, let's say bounded contexts with multiple aggregates involving all the components or all the entities across multiple aggregates, because the transaction is really a very big transaction, let's say, how do you deal with that? So that's something that we'll take up a little later. But right now, I think we should understand what is the aggregate is all about. And DDD aggregates are really sometimes confused with a collection of classes, such as list, maps, okay, order, clinic, visit, etc. But as far as possible, try to create these entities based on the domain concept. Let's say order. Order is a domain concept. Clinic is a domain concept. A visit to hospital, a visit to clinic is a domain concept. Playlist is a domain concept for hosting your music portal, right? Inventory is a domain concept. So you need to really look at those kind of approach. And then of course you do the context mapping, which is basically all about connecting the bounded context, as I said earlier. And of course there are various types of mapping there. Or for example, two bounded contexts can be partners, right? They basically work together. For example, let's say inventory and purchase, right? Or procurement working along with the inventory. Procurement is one bounded context, inventory is another. They can be connected with each other, they can be mapped, right? Or it can be shared kernel, which means sharing the part of the model and associated code as well. So whenever I say the context map, you are basically also looking at the code. Sometimes you write a code exclusively meant only for that business, bounded context within that subdomain. There can be another bounded context with its own another code, very specific to that bounded context. But sometimes these codes can exchange the information between them. That means there is a collaboration between these two, in which case you can have a part of the code shared between the two codes, between two bounded contexts. And you can identify that as a shared kernel. Or it can be a customer-supplier relationship, master-slave relationship, right? One can act like an upstream, sending the information to another bounded context, and the other one can be downstream, sending it back to another bounded context. So one is a master, the other one is a slave. Or it can be conformist, where two development teams have upstream downstream relationship, but the upstream team has no motivation to provide. They don't care about the other bounded context, how they are going to be accessing them. They don't have any specifics. For example, they might possibly create some service and simply expose it as a RESTful service to be consumed by the rest of the consumers. They don't care what technologies, what protocols the consumers use, as long as they conform to your protocol. The anti-corruption layer is something that layers can be getting corrupted across the collaboration context. So if you're extracting, let's say, data from the legacy systems, from the mainframe system, background system through a protocol, it might so happens that even you at the front end will be forced to follow certain conditions of the back end, in which case your own code gets corrupted because of the legacy restrictions, right? If you're extracting, let's say, an information from the backend systems, which is a legacy code, you have to make a lot of changes within your code which is, let's say, sitting on the front end. By doing that, you are actually corrupting your own code, because you're trying to accommodate a legacy integration requirement. And by doing that, you are slightly moving away from the DDD principle, which is not a good practice. So you might possibly have an integration code separated out from the core legacy code and from the core from the front end code, so that the code will be clean without having to do any kind of unnecessary operations that in any case it is not supposed to, right? And then you have the open host service, where you define a protocol and give that access to your subsystems. Anybody can access that, okay? Or you can publish a language, like in TIBCO or in some of the middleware technologies. You can simply publish a language that can be used by any of them. Then, or you may have two bounded context, nothing to do with each other, okay? Absolutely no connection. So leave them alone. If you don't follow any of these practices, you will end up with big ball of mud, as we said earlier, right? So context mapping is really all about putting together the bounded context and putting those adapters or transformers or translators, whatever you call them, so that all the responsibility of translating the language from one bounded context to the next one is enforced upon these adapters through the context mapping, instead of dumping them or putting them as a part of your code itself. Not a good practice. All right. So another example of context map is that, let's say you have an identity and access context exposing certain, or basically providing some kind of a notification, and that can be consumed by another bounded context, like Agile project management, for example, right? So you have these two bounded contexts interacting with each other through a RESTful API, and that's a very neat design. Okay, so again, I pause for a while here. I think we have another 30 minutes left. I'll try to cover as much as possible. So in any case, any quick questions, any comments so far? Anyone? Unless you're speaking into the muted mic. All right. Silence is not good, so I'm assuming people are following it. Okay, so some of the concepts are patterns like entities that you already know, that you can create an entity, which is basically an object within your systems that can be that might participate in a transaction quite well. Then there's a concept of value object. Basically, a value object is nothing but it's a small object which basically contains some information, and it may not have its own identity. Okay, so you can of course split a very, very big entity, like let's say customer, into two entities. One is the customer with customer ID, name and address as an entity, which will participate in a transaction. And the other one can be a value object. As the name suggests, it's a value object. It basically contains a value, and it doesn't have its own identity, but its identity comes because of its structure, right? Now, as an example, let's say 10 rupee note can be a value object, right? It has a value. It doesn't have an identity. Of course, it has got an identity because the RBI, when it prints the currencies, has to put some kind of an identifier or an ID for each of the currencies that it prints. But it doesn't matter when you start doing transactions, right? So if I, let's say, lend you 10 rupee note, I don't note down its ID. What I note down is the value, 10 rupees, right? And when you return the 10 rupee back to me tomorrow, I don't care if it is the same 10 rupee that you returned or some other 10 rupee note that you returned, right? As long as I get my value back, that's fine. So this is called a value object. It has only the value that is intrinsic, not its ID. Okay, and they are quite useful. They occupy much less memory space. If there are 20 customers living in the same apartment building, having a bank account with you as a bank, so only the name changes and the apartment number changes. The rest all is the same. The name of the apartment, the street name, the city name, all those details change. So why don't you convert that into value object, and all you have to do, if you were to, let's say, do a bulk transaction, all you have to do is to just load only one value object, which is common across, let's say, all the 20 users. So that will save you a lot of memory space, right? There are quite a few differences. You can read through that anyways, not a big deal. So, entities have their own intrinsic identity, the value objects don't. The notion of identity, equality refers to entities, but there's no notion of equality there. As long as the value is equal, that's fine. Value objects are, equality is not based on identity, but purely on their value. Entities have an history. So if I change the customer address in the last 5 years, let's say customer has relocated 3 times, I can build that history within the banking system, right? Whereas the value does not have a history. The customer would have transacted multiple times on multiple currencies, or doesn't matter, but we don't have to keep track of those value changes. So value objects have really zero lifespan. They're just used for the purpose of gathering the value or the information at that particular point in time for the transaction. A value object should always belong to one or more several entities. On their own, they can't live. A value object cannot exist on its own. It has to be owned by an entity. And value object should not be immutable. In the sense, you cannot change the content of a value object. You can't say, let's say I lend you 10 rupees today, and tomorrow you come back with 100 rupees, but with 100, 10 scratched on the top of that, saying that you take your 10 rupees back. That is not allowed. You cannot, change the content of a value object. It's immutable. The value object should not have their own tables in the database because they don't involve in transactions. It doesn't make sense, right? Okay, so you need to be able to model the aggregates using the DDD. Basically, you may have a multiple aggregates and so on and so forth, and with its own root. Here as an example of a car, engine is the root aggregate. Okay, from engine you can access the car, and then of course from there you can go to the wheel as your entity belonging to the root, and so on and so forth. So this whole thing. For example, if you change engine number, you have to change everything, right? I mean, basically the moment you change the root, that means that it has an impact on all the other parts as well. Or you cannot directly go, if you want to change directly, let's say a wheel got punctured and you want to change the wheel, you need to understand which car, and you need to understand what the engine number. You can't be, because the wheel does not exist on its own, it has to be accessed through the root. So the tips for modeling DDD aggregates is make them very small, design very small, protect from business invariants, which are rules, and make a list of all the aggregates along with the dependencies on each other, because all the aggregates might participate together to give you one transaction. Ask domain experts for acceptable time frame of updates. Any transaction that you carry out in your DDD domain will have to eventually make the transaction or the data consistent. okay, and so on. Then there's a concept of repository, which is basically another abstraction layer between your database and the domain layer. In the domain layer, you put all the aggregates, you carry out the actual transaction, all your domain logic resides within the domain layer. Then before you write them to the database, you might want to do some kind of manipulations, and that can be done using a repository. So it's a kind of advanced concept. Normally, I teach it in detail during the workshop. All right, so these are some of the concepts that we covered so far in DDD, and now I'll quickly touch upon what is called the event storming. So it's a kind of a approach for developing the requirements within your domain, domain-driven design projects, invented by Alberto Brandolini. So basically, what happens is very simple here. It's not a rocket science here to understand here. One concept you must understand is events. So domain-driven design is really about events, and most of the latest systems are all supported by the events. For example, Apache, Kafka, most of the Amazon, AWS, products are now supporting event streaming, event-driven architecture. And from that perspective, I think you need to understand how do we implement the event-based, architecture, event-based design for your DDD software. So a domain event is something that has happened in the past. Let's say, for example, a shipment or a product shipped, right, is an event. Or customer withdrew amount is an event. So basically, everything is centered around events. So generally what you do is invite the domain experts right in the beginning and ask them to explain as many events to you as possible, right? So they might say, for example, product created is an event, okay? Or payment made is an event. So most of the events that they explain are all the past tense. So all the events are really all about the past tense, and they need to be collected from the domain experts. Obviously, an event cannot occur without a command behind it. It may be, you may be pressing a key on the keyboard to start the event, or you may be getting a remote notification from somewhere to start or trigger that event. Doesn't matter, as long as it's a command. Okay, the command is going to trigger the domain event. Okay, and then you have the actor giving that command, or another system giving that command to that domain event. You must understand what those domain events are, and finally you create aggregate based on that particular domain. Okay, so in the event storming session with your domain experts, basically an event storming session is conducted between domain experts and the developers or the designers. The domain expert will tell, okay, here's an entity, here is an event, and because of that event, I'm giving this particular command to trigger that event, and that event is going to change the state of that event, and finally the event is completed, and once the event is over, that event gets stored in an event store, right? So basically what you're doing is you're logging the events into an event store, and in any typical bounded context or any kind of application, you may have hundreds of events. Okay, so what you do is first create all the events. Remember, you as a software developer has no idea what these events are, and you are not supposed to create them. Your domain experts will create it for them. If they don't know how to create them, you create them, but you have to create on their behalf. So in domain expert may say order validated, order shipped, order cancelled, email sent, payment received. These can be your events. And who triggers those events? You need to ask this question to the domain expert. They will tell you what is the command behind each one of those events. You capture them in the blue color. All the events are captured in the orange color. And once that is done, what you do is you create aggregate for each one of those events, and those aggregates are nothing but set of domain concepts and the domain entities that together will participate in executing that event. All right, and then for each event to occur, you need a certain set of rules, business rules and processes and policies that are applicable for that particular event, right? These are the constraints. For example, Flipkart wants to pay 5% of the value of the product sold to the seller, right? For example, I have written a couple of my own books and I sell them on Flipkart and Amazon, myself. And I'm a seller to both these guys, right? So what I do is they have given me a seller account. So every time I get an order, I get into my seller portal and I put my own rules, right? Like how much I want to charge for the shipment, how much I want to charge, for the product, right? I might possibly also put some extra rules that I want. I can't ship more than 5 books. So these are the rules that I need to put together for that event to occur. So I capture all those rules in the yellow color, and that's it. I circle each one of those. Now, if you really look at this particular diagram, what you've done is you have taken a lot of inputs from the domain experts, split them up into aggregates, split them up into various events, and you looked at the command that triggered that event, applied the business rules, created the set of cluster of entities around, that are participating in that event, and you're circling that as an aggregate. So basically aggregate is nothing but combination of all these entities, events, the business rules, everything together. Now, don't you think that each one of them can be a microservice? An order can be a microservice, a ship can be a microservice, a pay can be a microservice, notification can be a microservice. In fact, this is exactly what Uber, Ola, your Airbnb, your Netflix, everybody does. What they normally do, they create microservices based on DDD approach by segregating, by creating these kind of entities, all clustering them together as an aggregate. All right. So that's how you use the microservices for that. And of course, within the domain-driven design, you got a lot of services. As I said in the earlier of my slide deck, that don't corrupt your domain code. Domain code is only for delivering domain services. Application service is nothing to do with your domain service. Application services will deal with how to transfer file, how to save a file, how to get the input from the screen, how to handle events, how to, for example, send notifications. I mean, all these are application related services. That is nothing to do with your domain service. Whereas the infrastructure service deals exclusively with the infrastructure related services. Maybe to an API, or maybe writing to a database table, or maybe taking backups or doing a messaging. I mean, these are all the infrastructure services. Don't write the code related to infrastructure service or application service into the domain service code. If you are domain logic, it has to be a very, very small logic of 5% to 10% of the logic, purely based on the business invariants or business constraints or business rules. That's it. Rest all 90% of any software that you write in today's world is non-domain. Rest all is, basically only about 5 to 10% is your domain, right? So that's how you actually do it. Okay, and I would possibly stop here. Of course, there is a lot of other stuff to cover, but normally that's something that I cover in my 2-day workshop. This is typically a 2-day workshop at DDD. I cover in detail about all aspects, all the concepts, and a lot of stuff that is covered. So I hope this should be enough for you to understand the concept behind DDD and the concept behind the services, and of course, you know how the interaction between the developers and the domain experts happen, right? So if you know how to visualize a given enterprise in terms of the domains and subdomains, and for each one of them, if you can come up with a domain, ubiquitous language that highlights all the domain concepts pertaining to that particular subdomain, and then add a lot of other content like aggregates, events, and so on and so forth, which is nothing but the content for the business, bounded context, then you are actually creating a kind of a microservice that is ready for deployment. How do you deploy it is something that is left to you. You could possibly use a lot of other technologies around it. You can use Spring Boot, web services, uh, or you can implement using maybe some other tools. You can do the service delivery using discovery, for example, using Kubernetes. You can do configuration management using some tools there. But generally speaking, all these tools you're talking about, whether it's a Histrix or OAuth or Spring Cloud, okay, or Apache, Kafka, for example. I mean, these are the tools. They can help you develop a very clean, good software. But if your architecture is not driven by the DDD concept, then at the end of the day, what you're doing is, you're creating a software that is highly influenced by the tools, but not by the design principles. So, so my approach would be, I identify the business domain first, understand what the business challenges are, and create business ubiquitous language and the concepts, and then take all of that to the developers, and then let them apply all the principles of DDD that I discussed earlier, and then go back to your list of tools that you want to download and start using it, right? I mean, there's a Elk there, there's a Zipkin, Kubernetes, and Ribbon, Histrix. I mean, there are quite a few tools available today. How you do, how you develop application using some of these tools is absolutely up to you. It has nothing to do with DDD. Some of the tools like Apache Kafka, for example, provides you a streaming or event-driven architecture support, makes your life much easier. Uh, the whole world is now heading towards implementing some of the ideas around that. Okay, and if you have some requirements purely based on the tool, using DDD may be a challenging. Couple of other ideas that I would like to suggest is that there is a couple of patterns which I didn't cover, of course. One of them is most importantly the CQRS, command query, responsibility segregation, which basically divides your command, which changes the state of the entities versus the query, which basically queries the database. If you were to use the same backend or event store to expose to command as well as queries, then you will have a lot of challenges with the performance, right? So one of the ideas within DDD is to use CQRS pattern to segregate the query and command databases or event stores separately. But the connectivity between these two stores should be almost like a real time, because otherwise it will lead up to a lot of transactional integrity challenges. So some of those challenges are dealt with by products like Apache Kafka and so on. So you could possibly download and study more on that. APIs can also be developed using the DDD approach, because it's a very neat approach to identifying the backend resources that you want to expose through RESTful APIs, because each one of those RESTful APIs has its own boundary, has its own context. So they can, one API can appear as one aggregate, right? So that's the kind of a mapping that you can do. So all in all, that's the way the DDD benefits both the communities, developer community as well as the business community. So what I'm going to do is to really quickly pause here and thank you guys for your time. I hope I was able to kind of convince you about the importance of DDD. And of course, there's much more to cover. So even if you are disappointed here a little bit here and there, bear with me, because some of these are very good ideas that you can implement right away within the next couple of weeks' time if you have understood them clearly. Any questions before I close?
Hi, this is Akanksha.
Akanksha?
Yeah, so I just had one question. I got some idea about the DDT with your well articulated session. I just wanted to ask, like, whose responsibility, if in a project or in our team setup we do not have a actual business analyst, but there is a PO that we have, who's more on the business side, then whose responsibility or whose area is to drive these command and query and whatever structure that we were seeing sometime before. So should PO be also knowing about the DTD, or it's just maybe the architect or the developers? If they are well versed with the DTD, it goes on well in that setup.
Right. Great question, Akanksha. So, obviously you can't take somebody's role and act like a domain expert to provide the input that you need for your project team. Project manager, PO, or for example, the business analyst can be a good replacement for the domain expert, definitely. I would suggest you take a help from the domain expert, whoever it is, who is actually an end user, is the person that needs to be able to provide the inputs, because it's the person, he's a stakeholder, he or she. And at the end of the day, if something goes wrong or something not properly implemented, you need to go back and hold that particular domain expert responsible for that. So it's as simple as that. So DDD basically simplifies by putting together both the domain expert and the developer in the same boat. So there is no excuse between them. So they need to be able to cooperate with each other. Akanksha.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Any other questions, please?
Hi, Sharad. This is Anirudh. Am I audible?
Yeah, of course. Anirudh, tell me what's up.
Yeah. Thanks for a great session. I have a question about modernizing legacy applications. So if you have a legacy application that is like, a big ball of mud now, and you want to modernize it, and you may not have the, all the resources to completely re-engineer it from the scratch, then would you advise that we attack the domain logic part of it on the DDD principles, and then go about attacking the other parts of the application?
Yeah, Anirudh. So basically, I think your question is extremely important in today's context. They don't know what to do with the legacy systems. Legacy system may be let's say 10-year-old Java application or J2 application, or it may be residing in the erstwhile client server system. So touching those systems is always dangerous. But of course, we don't want to spend too much money on managing their maintenance, right? So what you normally do is you have to negotiate with the stakeholder for those legacy systems. You can't directly convert them into the kind of DDD compliant or DDD based code. What you need to do is to really re-architect the existing legacy. Some of them can be done through context mapping, which I explained earlier, that legacy is one entity, Within that, a lot of code has been created. You don't have any idea about how the code has been created. The code possibly is doing much more than what it should be. It's already corrupted with a lot of infrastructure code, front-end code, non-domain code, application services code. So how do you really, refactor that code and work it out? Really depends on the complexity of the code. Let's say if your legacy system is very complex, don't do anything. Don't even touch it. Just expose whatever the legacy services are there as external services to be consumed by the front-end Java systems or your web-based applications as RESTful APIs, or maybe you can use some kind of a middleware technologies, MQ series kind of a technology, or MQ Rabbit. Be done with that. Don't try to even repair that, because that will be a very, very dangerous thing to do. If the legacy system is not so complex, you can have a piecemeal approach to slowly split it up into multiple, smaller systems over a period of time, and finally migrate entire legacy into a new environment using DTD approach. So these are my suggestions, but again, really it goes by the internal thinking of the stakeholders. So domain experts are the best people to tell you how to go about doing that, because they are the guys who might say that this is a business critical, mission critical application, don't touch it. In which case, just listen to them. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I have last 2 minutes. You can make out of so much out of these 2 minutes. If you want to, you can ask any questions around this.
Clearing their queries.
All right, looks like there are no queries, so I
Yeah,
am logging off a couple of minutes
Yeah,
from
just,
now.
just
You can
thank
always send me
you.
an email, send it to Preeti
Yes,
at
yes.
Optimistic Technologies. So you can always reach out to me through them. In case of any of the workshop related inquiries, you can send it to them, and I'll be happy to help you out. Thank you
Yes,
so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, participants, all for your joining here. And I'm just shared a link for a feedback that will be very helpful for us if you just take some time to fill that link. for
Sure.
the sessions. Okay.
Thank
Thank you all. Thanks a lot for making this wonderful session. Okay.
Thanks, Preeti, for your logistics.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very much.
Thank you. Thank
Hope
Bye.
we meet soon again.
you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Thanks.
I share
Bye.
the link. You
Yeah.
thanks.
Sure. Thanks. Bye. Take care.
Bye. Take care, sir.